You know, it's rare in life that you get to meet a true innovator. And our keynote speaker is just that. We all know the last 15 years of my life have been devoted to how the meat, dairy, and egg industries harm 10 billion animals just in the US alone, land animals, how they harm the environment, how they harm public health, how they harm the people who work in these places, how they harm the people who are forced to live near these places, and how they add to climate change. We all know that. Many of us work to strengthen laws and increase regulations to try to get some sort of effective control, if that is ever going to happen, to this industry. But Ethan Brown marches to a different drummer. His idea, create and sell plant-based meat without killing and torturing animals. Wow. Wow. Yeah. Don't you wish you'd thought of that? Ethan is the founder and the CEO of Beyond Meat, which is now known worldwide. And we've joined the millions of people who are eating those products. In fact, we've all been eating Beyond Meat products this whole weekend. We are eating delicious, protein-packed meat that is better for the environment and bypasses the animals. Mind-blowing. Ethan's goal is to win over consumers and beat the meat industry at its own game. Don't regulate them, replace them. So before we get Ethan in the flesh, we're going to get this wonderful and exciting video. Cue it, babe.
Several times a day, we have a choice of what to put at the center of our plate. But what if something came along and gave you the chance to go beyond the status quo and truly choose for the future? By increasing plant-based food consumption, you are focused on the single most powerful tool our global society has to preserve our planet, take control over our health, and support the welfare of the rest of life on this beautiful earth.
It's about 2/3 of 12 to 14-year-olds in the US have very early signs of cholesterol disease.
Eating red and processed meat increases the risk of developing type 2 diabetes by 62%.
We do say that you should really limit processed meat. It's considered a known carcinogen, and red meat is considered a probable carcinogen in humans.
The whole quest around Beyond Meat is to build a perfect piece of meat. And it wasn't to try to build a meat alternative. It was to try to build meat directly from plants. We worked with leading medical and nutrition experts and spent years designing this latest product generation, Beyond 4.
It has a simple list of ingredients. It's 21 grams of protein coming from lentils and fava beans. When you see what goes into this, you can't help but smile.
The new formulation of the Beyond Burger really impressed us in our evaluation. We're going to use those beautiful natural vegetables with heart-healthy avocado oil. Saturated fat's been cut down by 60%.
Replacing saturated fat with an unsaturated fat. There's an obvious blood cholesterol benefit.
So this tastes just like a meat burger.
The Beyond Burger emits a fraction of the greenhouse gas emissions and requires dramatically less land than its animal-based equivalent, providing an unprecedented opportunity to rewild these lands, bringing carbon out of the atmosphere and cooling our planet. That farming families should be embraced as among the strongest fabric of our communities. We should instead be paying farmers, redirecting subsidies to not only grow food, but to become stewards of climate.
One of the really cool opportunities, I think, for cattle ranchers is, get them to change their mindset from being livestock producers to carbon ranchers.
There's a lot of opportunities, not only by decreasing the amount of emissions, but also bringing back nature.
If I can leave you with one thing, it is this. You fearlessly confront the questions of our time and refuse to go numb in defeat. There is truly hope and a path forward in eating closer to the sun. There is personal bodily health. There is a future for our planet and a miracle of life we share it with. And there's kindness. So let's go get it. Thank you so much for having me. Can you guys hear me okay? It is just such an honor and a delight to be here. I envy you guys and what you do every day and really just feel at home here. You know, not have to worry about whether the milk on the table is from an animal or not and things of that nature. It's just such a warm and amazing feeling. And I want to just comment that my wife is here, who love her to death, and she should be up here with me giving this speech because she's such an amazing part of what we do. So thank you, Trace. I don't play golf, but if any of you do, feel free to take some of the Beyond meatballs and use them tomorrow. They were a little overcooked. Just saying. Okay. I thought the shepherd's pie was great. But anyway, I think Hilton is paying me back. I stay here a lot. Okay, I really want to say you guys are abolitionists, and I know that history will record you as such. And I think in my worldview, that is one of the greatest honors. I think about the history of human life as a river. A river that began with single-cell scavengers to multicellular predators to us, humans, who became sophisticated hunters, herders, and livestock farmers. That river, however, reached a very important fork on November 24th, 1859. That day in London, Charles Darwin finally published The Origin of Species, and in doing so, provided a scientific basis for the belief that we in this room share, that animals are us, we are them, and that differences among species are matters of degree, not kind. I find that few articulate this more clearly than the philosopher James Rachel, who argues that Darwin stressed of animals that in an important sense, their nervous system, their behaviors, their cries are our nervous systems, our behaviors, and our cries, with only a little modification. For those who live among non-human animals, like so many of us here, this commonality of life, the shared origin of life, could be intuitively obvious, piercing in its clarity. Standing early in the morning in the kitchen of an old house on our farm years ago, sure an experience that Chris has also experienced, I sadly and solemnly pulled a drowned mouse from our dog's water bowl. As the weight of the water brushed aside her fur and exposed her leg and hand in direct light, the similarity of my hand and her foot powerfully communicated to me the truth of Darwin's central insight than any words on a page could do. I looked at that paw and said, that is my hand. The marriage of science and experience notwithstanding, our Western culture blindly barreled past this fork in the river. We were swept along by powerful currents of convention, tradition, religion, convenience, greed, law, others. I know the most about the tragic consequences of staying this course as it relates to the reshaping of life on the North American continent. And we'll pause on this history for a moment. I do so because I fear that in the anthropocentric wokeness of the progressive movement, a movement I believe in, there is a troubling romanticism when it comes to the choice of our food. I cannot help but see this when I visit Erewhon in Venice, Whole Foods in Santa Monica, or when I travel to South by Southwest in Austin. The enlightened omnivore buys with fanfare so-called regenerative beef, artisan meats, locally produced pork, milk, cage-free eggs. Setting aside all of the mental gymnastics one must go through to accept the greenwashing such an assortment demands, I cannot help but wonder, what are we trying to return to? In the most direct sense, it is about animal products that are devoid of antibiotics and hormones, and is likely a vote against corporate agriculture. Yet the narrative certainly includes a return to that which is natural, to perhaps simpler, even purer times. And this is where I grow particularly uncomfortable. You see, nature had to die and stay dead for animal agriculture in its great and current expanse to live. It has in fact been said that livestock provided a better colonizer, proved to be a better colonizer than the early Europeans who brought them to the Americas, as invasive cattle and swine multiplied and fanned out from early settlements. Conflict arose almost immediately as Europeans began settling New England, with tensions mounting, such as the scene depicted on this screen, as natives suffered trampled and pilfered corn, squash, and bean fields, the Three Sisters. This dynamic is in fact highlighted as one of the many contributing factors in Metacom's war in 1675, considered the deadliest war of colonial settlement of New England. Nearly 2 centuries later, by the time Darwin published Origin of Species, westward expansion across the continent was in full swing, and livestock were in tow. Colonel Nelson Miles, who commanded troops against natives in the Red River War in the 1880s, wrote plainly in his memoirs that it might seem like cruelty and wasteful extravagance, but the buffalo, like the Indian, stood in the way of civilization and the path of progress. And a decree had gone forth that they must both give way. The same territory which a century ago was supporting those vast herds of wild game is now covered with domestic animals. Even famed naturalist John Muir got in on it, opining that the bison, whose skulls are captured in this picture, might as well give way to better cattle. This direct displacement was, of course, accompanied by the population destruction of grizzly bears, wolves, such as the one featured here, killed in her den along with her litter pups in routine practice, pronghorns, among others, and a war on coyotes that continues today. It was a vast and government-sponsored undertaking, as my friend and the brilliant historian Dan Flores has researched. Back when it was a territory, Montana, for example, used up to 2/3 of its state budget in the 1870s and 80s to kill gray wolves and coyotes. The suppression of competing species continues in various forms, and ADLF has been terrific in exposing today's ongoing war against predators, a war carried out to protect livestock on the behalf of industry by the Department of Agriculture's Wildlife Services Agency. As I reflect on what was lost to gain today's food system, I cannot help but consider large-scale industrial agriculture as a sweeping, wildly successful, and enduring physical and intellectual legacy of colonialism. And in doing so, I return to the progressive omnivore in the aisles of our supermarkets and hope they will someday consider their participation in its perpetuation. To be transparent, I hope they and society more generally will consider in a positive light another way to deliver protein to the center of the plate. That is, building meat directly from plants. My company, Beyond Meat, does just that, and in doing so, aspires to contribute powerfully to the restoration of nature, human health, and the stabilization of our climate. An interesting and useful idea, yet after its meteoric rise, one that is experiencing turbulence in a turbulent time, critics, competitive forces, short sellers are having a long and productive day in the sun. Interest groups, whose skilled merchants of doubt are hired by incumbent industries, including, it appears, pork processors, cattlemen's associations, and big pharma, reflecting the sale of antibiotics to livestock, have put to work millions of dollars across newspaper ads, TV spots, op-eds, blogs, and paid influencers to elicit fear, confusion, and complacency among American consumers. Fake meat, real chemicals, this became the corporate refrain. and it's been faithfully banged out by hired guns on keyboards here and abroad with a cadence that is predictable as it is frequent. As these attacks mounted over the last 5 years, we saw the narrative of plant-based meat change from one of innovation and hope for our planet, our health, and the rest of life we share this world with, to negativity and doubt about our products, with consumers playing back the carefully constructed messaging around processed fake meat. We faced a choice. We could simply hammer our fists on the table and say this isn't fair while exclaiming our product's attributes, or we could do something different. We did something else. We let iron sharpen iron. We went to work to make our products as unassailable as possible. Working with leading doctors, nutritionists, and dietitians, health institutions, and universities, we doubled down on the health and ingredient profile of our products. To be clear, we knew our existing portfolio delivered strongly for human health. In fact, we've been working with Stanford School of Medicine many years and had clinically and statistically significant results from various studies. For example, in the Stanford Swap Meat study, researchers had a statistically significant number of consumers eat animal protein twice a day for a full week before switching to Beyond Meat twice a day for a full week, each in 8-week periods. During the Beyond Meat period, those consumers saw a statistically significant drop in LDL or bad cholesterol, and the same with levels of TMAO, which is a compound in the gut associated with heart disease. We were also seeing countless other proof points, including one I find particularly interesting. Across the country at colleges and universities, as teams prepare for a year of practice and competition ahead, athletes are run through rigorous tests to identify possible underlying conditions. In the Southeast Athletic Conference, better known as the SEC, one of the participating universities put their men's basketball team through just such a series of tests. After collection and analysis of blood work from each player, a university doctor went to the trouble to call the coaching staff to share that one player's blood was, in particular, a positive outlier. This player is our son. A college student who may possibly hold the distinction of eating more Beyond Meat than any human being on the planet. Mind you, I'm not suggesting that Beyond Meat is singularly responsible for his blood work, but rather I do believe it is influenced by a plant-based diet, one that is made easier to sustain due to Beyond Meat. Nevertheless, we wanted to fight the battle by delivering our healthiest portfolio yet. The end result, after many years of development, is the Beyond 4 platform, which you just saw. We first rolled this out in our burgers and ground beef. Made with avocado oil and boasting only 2 grams of saturated fat, amidst red lentils, brown rice, fava bean, yellow pea protein, and a shortened and clean ingredient list. The burger and beef earned various endorsements, including from the American Heart Association, American Diabetes Association Clean Label Project, as well as earning Good Housekeeping Seal of Nutrition. To address the process criticism, we also began emphasizing the farmers who grow our crops, such as the one pictured here and in the video in North Dakota, who grows the fava beans used in not only the beef products that we make in the steak and the mince and burger form, but also Beyond Steak, which has also been endorsed by the American Heart Association. As we move forward, you will increasingly hear us celebrate our process. Yes, you see, we do make meat from plants through a process. It's actually a beautiful and simply elegant process. And if we can clearly communicate it to the American consumer, I believe that many will ultimately choose it. I'll use Beyond Steak to illustrate. Fava beans, like other legumes, are a nitrogen-fixing crop. Through nodules in the root system, legumes absorb nitrogen from the atmosphere and convert it into building blocks for their growth. After harvest, plant residue contributes nitrogen back into the soil. This process, known as nitrogen fixation, helps regenerate the soil and reduce the need for fertilizer. So in the first instance, Our feedstock is adding value back to the earth and is actually regenerative. The fava bean is then harvested and it's milled. Just like many products are milled and the flour is created. This flour is then placed in an air chamber. And because the density of the particles of starch and protein are different, they naturally separate. We take the protein and we run it through heating, cooling, and pressure. Protein presents, let's say, like this in a plant. It's kind of jumbled up. What we're doing when we run it through heating, cooling, and pressure is breaking the bonds and resetting them into the form of muscle, so that our sensory system experiences that as muscle or meat. We then mix in any natural flavors and beet juice for color. That's the big bad process. I love its simplicity. I love its cleanliness. I love its freedom from antibiotics, from hormones, feces, blood, pus, fear, and death. Oh, here are the ingredients. Glad you guys are sitting down. You might need a dictionary. Water, wheat gluten, fava bean protein, expeller pressed canola oil, salt, natural flavor, and then less than 1% of spice, garlic powder, onion powder, pomegranate, yeast extract, sunflower lecithin, fruit and vegetable juice. By leaning into what we were under attack for, by emphasizing our clean and healthy ingredients and simple process, we are getting back on our feet, coming off the ropes, and gathering strength again. My optimism for the future is born of experience, an unwavering belief in the inevitability of our category and the underlying history of innovation. That we are traversing a well-worn path was brought home to me one day after reading an analysis done by an investment firm, and shortly thereafter finding myself standing before an ice machine in the Dallas airport. The dispenser on the ice machine had a sign that simply said ice and water. I'll briefly tell the story and you'll see why the absence of the word artificial before ice is relevant here. In the first half of the 1800s, an enterprising man named Frederick Tudor living in Boston gave birth to a promising business. Known as the Boston Ice King, Tudor's enterprise specialized in cutting blocks of ice from New England's cold lakes and shipping it south to perform the various functions of ice. By 1851, an entrepreneur by the name of John Gorey sought to commercialize mechanized refrigeration and produce what was then referred to as artificial ice. Ridiculed by the press, the New York Globe called him a crank. Dr. Gorey and his invention were also subject to an intense smear campaign undertaken by the incumbent industry. Tudor was said to play an active role in this campaign, with his biographer reporting the Boston Ice King to have stated that moral causes have been brought into play to prevent the machine's use. Apparently, these moral causes included the spreading of a rumor that artificial ice was replete with pathogens, and therefore unsafe. Only later it was revealed that ice harvests in lakes, reflecting contaminated waterways, harbored pathogens. Despite incumbent industry efforts at sabotage that destabilized its early ascent, the mechanized ice industry ultimately flourished, aided by scale, cost reduction, and such factors as the Civil War, as well as periodic warm winters that decimated the northern supply of harvested ice. The parallel in this story to our situation is, of course, obvious. The animal protein industry relies heavily on chemicals for scale and efficiency, routinely struggles with contamination, relies on heavy processing, and contributes mightily to the disease epidemics of heart disease, diabetes, and cancer. Yet successfully painted plant-based meat as fake, processed, full of chemicals, and dangerous for your health. And just as mechanized ice did against this campaign, I'm certain we will prevail. In part by how we react, in part by the inevitable nature of this transition, and in part by exogenous events that we can't yet today predict. And that's good, because aside from its obvious animal welfare benefits, relevance for human health and natural resources, we need plant-based meat if we're going to solve for climate. You see, contrary to the hopelessness that may pervade us on this subject, there's an immediate strategy to tackle climate, or at least make a big dent in it, if we have the courage and the political fortitude to act. Here it is. As we know, not all greenhouse gases are created equally. And when the variable time is considered, some can play an outsized role. Of the big three, carbon, methane, and nitrous oxide, we know that methane and nitrous oxide are the more potent. But more importantly, methane has a particularly short half-life, around 10 years compared to carbon's half-life of over 100. Simply put, methane cycles through the atmosphere more quickly than carbon, which means we can see cooling benefits sooner if we curtail its emissions and therefore exert more immediate downward pressure on temperatures as we tackle carbon. And because animal agriculture is the single largest source of methane release, reducing livestock numbers is key to the rapid reduction of methane concentrations in the atmosphere. This is where plant-based meat comes in. And the second and most powerful part of this strategy emerges. The Beyond Burger emits 90% fewer emissions, uses 97% less land and 97% less water, and about half the energy of an equivalent animal beef burger. Focus for a moment on that one statistic, 97% less land. As NYU professor Matthew Hayek and others have pointed out, allowing native biomass and related ecological systems to return to the roughly 30% of global lands currently devoted to livestock represents a key carbon sequestration opportunity, specifically a wholesale shift from livestock to plant-based food production by 2050, and the freeing of lands previously devoted to livestock to use instead in carbon sequestration could take down between 332 to 547 gigatons of CO2 equivalents. This level of reduction is equivalent to 99 to 163% of the entire forward CO2 emissions budget, consistent with a 66% chance of meeting the UN's requirements of not warming the climate more than 1.5 degrees Celsius. So it's a two-part strategy. One, bring down methane quickly. Two, sequester carbon on lands freed up by the transition to a plant-based food system. Do this now while you're working on everything else: cement, transport, steel, etc. In closing, we need not wait for a technological demigod to deliver us from the threat of climate change or to make our planet livable for future generations. Doing so would in fact be irreversible and irresponsible. Instead, we need to do what each of you do every day. We need to actualize a reverence for life. In this simple philosophy of the theologian, doctor, and Nobel Prize winner Albert Schweitzer, he is calling on us to universalize the golden rule, to do unto others as you would have done to yourself, so that it applies not only just narrowly to humans, but rather extends to the rest of life on earth. In doing so, he is, as you are, petitioning for an expanded ethical circumference. The long arc of history offers an expansion of the circle of ethics, but is a history replete with retreats, an inch gained, a mile lost, from the white male to other races and other genders. Schweitzer and you are challenging us to evolve further and extend ethical consideration beyond humans to other species. Schweitzer centered this ethic on the universally and plainly apparent will to live present in all other species. If we do this by embracing plant-based meat and plant-based protein more generally, and give the rest of life on Earth the space and resources to live, we can save nature, and in doing so, we can save ourselves. Thank you.